Welcome to another video. In this video, we are going to have a look at Selenium with Python. So if you remember and if you have been following my YouTube channel, I posted one video some time back. And this video was actually about scraping data from this site using Scrapy. Now what we will be doing is we will be doing the same thing using Selenium. So Selenium tool was actually created for functional testing or the user interface testing, but it is suitable for web scraping as well, especially when we have dynamic sites involved. So the first thing that you need to do is install it using pip install Selenium. The next thing that you will need is the driver for your browser. So I'm using Chrome, so I'll be using Chrome driver. Now here on this page, take a note that there will be more than one versions which will be listed here very frequently. So you need to check and accordingly install the correct driver. So let's check the version number. So in my case, it is 85. So I'm going to download the driver for 85. And there is this zip file. And inside this zip file, I've already downloaded it and unzipped it. There is one exe. So this exe I unzipped in a folder. So this is where I have unzipped this exe. So this name is totally dependent on you, how you name it. So for example, here I created the folder Chrome driver, but I have Chrome driver and Gecko driver both. So what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to use IPython. So let's see. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to import the actual driver. So we can import it using from selenium.webdriver import Chrome. Note that C is capital here. So now that we have Chrome imported, let's create one instance. And this is traditionally called driver, but you are free to call it whatever you want. This is where we need to provide the path. And this path needs to be passed as executable path, this parameter. So this is where we need to write the full path of Chrome driver. And I'm on Windows, so I'm going to use raw strings. Now, if you don't get any error, and a browser window opens, everything is working fine. So let's put these two side by side. So driver provides lot of functions, but the most important one is get. So for example, if you want to go to Google, we can simply write this URL here like that, and you will see that google.com will be loaded here. Then the next thing that we have is a selector functions. So here is the documentation for Selenium. So selenium-python read the docs. So if you look at locating elements, so there are a lot of methods. Find element by ID, by name, by XPath, by link text, and a lot of other things. But what I will recommend is you stick with either XPath or a CSS selector. Reason, you will not get anything by learning how to use these methods if you are planning to use any other tool. So if you are planning to use Scrapy later on, or if you have Scrapy in mind later on, XPath and selectors, CSS selector, that is what is going to work in Scrapy. These also work in BS4 or Beautiful Soup 4. So there is no point learning anything else. So let's create the selector for Google. So what I'm going to do is just right click and inspect. And we can see that this is the input. So just right click and copy selector. So the method that we are going to call is find element by a CSS selector. By CSS selector, and this selector that I just pasted was created by the browser. This is going to actually return an instance of the text box. So let's store it in a variable. So I'm just calling it T. Okay. And now what we can do is we can actually type in the text. For example, if I call this function send keys, and let's search for Python, and let me hide this as well and see what happens when I press enter. You can see that Python is searched for. Similarly, what I can do is I can send either enter key or I can click on this button. So let's click inspect, copy, selector, and then what we can do is again we are going to call the same method, and now let's call the click method. So we have the search results. So these actions can actually be copied and written into a script. So let me paste this. So I've just pasted in this part, these two lines. And now let's work on a practical problem. So I think this will be a good point where we'll see practical example of how real world problems are solved. So this is the site, and on this site there are list of schools, and if you click on one of the school, you'll get the contact information like physical address, postal address, phone number, and so on. And this site is dynamic. So these things are loaded using JavaScript. So let's write the code for this. So the first thing that we are going to write in our script is we are going to call the get method. And let's pass on this driver.get method the URL of the site. Let's create the selector, because what we need to do is we want to create a selector which selects all these school links. So this time I'm going to take a shortcut and use the selector gadget. So if you don't know what is a selector gadget, if you simply search for selector gadget Chrome, this should be the first result. And by the way, this selector gadget is available for Firefox as well. So once you have this added, you will have a button on your toolbar. So what you can do is you can click on the items that you want to select, and you can click on the items that you don't want to select. So this alphabet again, I don't want to select. Scroll down and verify that everything is selected and nothing is left out. So there we have it. So 267. So what we will do now is we are going to create a variable selector, and I'm going to paste this. Now at this point, if we just want to get a quick list of all the schools, what we can do is we can call driver.findElements by CSS selector. Note that there are two methods. There is one find element in singular. You can see that all these methods in singular, element, find element, and then we have find elements. So we are going to use find elements because we need more than one items, and this is going to return us all the links. Remember that all these methods are actually going to return the elements. So every element will have some property. So what we can do now is we can run a simple loop for a link in links, and then every link has a property text. So we can print it out, and finally we are going to quit the browser. So this is the complete code, and let's run it and verify that everything is working correctly. Now I want you to notice the browser window. So see what happens on browser window and what happens in the output. See, it is still loading. The site is extremely slow and the browser closed. Now did you notice that this program did not even wait for the links to load? So we need to inform the driver that you need to wait for the page load. So there are two ways. The first is explicit wait and the second is implicit wait. So let's look at the documentation. I always recommend looking into the documentation. So go back and there you have it. Explicit waits and implicit wait. So I'm going to show you the implicit wait first. So it's a very simple one-liner command, driver.implicit wait. So if we just take this and put it in our script, so just after we call get, we are going to set it to not 10 but to a bigger amount. I'm calling it, setting it to 60 because this site is particularly slow today. Now note that what happens now, the same code. The site has not yet loaded, but the page is waiting. Now it is fully loaded and you can see all these schools are being printed quickly. Let's look at the output and we have all these schools printed out. One more thing that you need to remember here is just because we are saying implicit wait 60, it doesn't mean that it is going to always wait for 60 seconds. It's like increasing the timeout to 60. But this approach is not foolproof. It doesn't work always. So what we need to do instead is we need to define explicit wait. So basically it just means that the driver has to wait for a specific element. So let's try and do that as well. So we need some imports, few more imports. So these 3 imports, we don't need WebDriver here. So I'm going to simply paste in this code. So we are going to paste in this, and this is the line that we need, only this line. So what we will do now is instead of implicit wait, so I'm going to remove it. Now let's look at this. So it is going to return element, and this is the driver instance, we already have it, and this is the timeout. So let's increase it to 60, and then how long it will wait? It will wait for until the presence of element is located. And this is how we have to select. So instead of by ID, I am going to use by CSS selector. And which element are we looking for? This one. So let's move this up. So this is the selector. And here we are specifying that we are going to use CSS selector. So similarly, we have XPath selector, ID selector, class name and all that. But let's stick to CSS selector or XPath, whatever is your comfort level. So we have all elements located and element located. So let's use presence of all elements located. And this is going to give us the links. So we don't need this line now. And let's run this code again. So this is exactly the same output. So let's move on to the next step. Now, once we have all the school links, what we need to do is we need to click on those links. So what we can do is on each link, we can click. All right. So sounds simple. So link dot click. So if we click this link, what will happen? Let's look at the page. So this is the page. It will come to this page, right? So let's print the school name. So this time I am going to use the inspect tool and create a selector. So we can see that this is H1 inside school title. So I'm going to copy school title, Control F. So we can verify the selector right here. Now this is a class. So dot and then H1. So there we have it. And we can see 1 of 1. That means there is only one of its kind. So this is our selector for school name. So what we are going to do actually is school name selector. This also I'm storing in a variable. So now let's print it out. So what we will do is we will look for driver dot find element by CSS selector. And this is our selector. Again, remember that this is going to return the element. So this is going to return us anything. So let's call it name element and print this name element dot text. Simple. Now I don't want to go to all the links. So let's limit it to 2. And there is one more thing. Once we have read that particular school name, then what we have to do is we need to click on the back button so that we can come back to the previous page. So the function that we are going to call is driver dot back. Very simple. I know that this is not going to work, but let me show you what is the problem. So Control Shift F10 in PyCharm. So we have the browser window open. School page is loading. Okay, now we have the exception. It did go to this school page, but we have an exception that no such element, unable to locate this selector. Now why it happened? Remember this guy? WebDriver.wait. This is step 1. That is the one thing that comes into mind, right? So I'm going to simply, instead of directly looking for the first element, and note that you need to do it only for the first element, not for every element. So I'm going to take school name selector and put it here, and not all elements. We have only one, presence of element located, school name. And this is going to give us this name element, right? Sounds okay. So now again, this time it will work, but we will have another problem. So let me show you what is the problem. So directory page, main page is loading. The first school clicked, and then we have a different error. Now this error is stale element reference. So whenever you see stale element reference, it always means that wherever you are looking for element or performing some action on the element, the browser is not having that page loaded. So let's look at the error number, line of the error. So this was fine. It printed this name. So it came here, and then we pressed the back button. So what happens? We are in a loop. It comes here, link.click, but now we don't have link in the memory. This is gone because we moved to a different page. So what we have to do? We have to look for the link again. So this line of code we have to run again. I hope you are getting the problem. So let me try to explain this problem once again. So we have all the links in memory. This loop started to run, and we clicked on the first item from this links. We clicked on first item. So now, as soon as you click something, you have navigated to a different page. So this links is not available anymore. So that is why once you move to a different page, you need to again fill it. So now this element is stale because you move to a different page. So what we need to do now? We need to search for all the links again. So what we will do? We will copy this line and we will paste it here. But now our second problem is, how do we keep track of which link has been clicked? Because at this point, if we run it again, it's going to click on the first link, right? So what we will do is, we will use a different loop. We will use for I in range, and this range is going to be for the length of links. So we had 267. So this loop is going to run 267 times. And this time what we are going to do is, instead of clicking on link, what we will do, we will look for links I.click. So what basically it means is, when it is running for the first time, when this loop is running for the first time, I is 0. So it should run and click on the first school. But next time, even though we are looking for the link again, what is happening? It is the I has increased to 1. So this time it will click on the next school. And again, let's limit it. Actually, let's run it only for 2 schools. So I'm hard coding it to 3. And let's run it. So 0, 1, 2. It should return 3 schools. So let's see. So first school, school name printed. Second school, school name printed. And third school, school name printed. So now what we can do is, we can use the simple driver.find element by XPath or by CSS selector, and we can select all the elements. Note that this WebDriver wait is required only for the first element. So what I'm going to do here is, I'm going to take a shortcut And I'm going to paste in a code that I wrote earlier. Now look at this code. This is actually very simple. Once we have the name available, I'm creating a dictionary. So this dictionary is having name, physical address, postal address, phone. So we can actually go on and add other elements. And here I'm simply calling driver.findElement by XPath. Now this time I am using XPath. And the reason is, let me show you on the page what is the reason. Now here on the details page, if we look at the physical address, inspect, and here you can see that there is no specific class, anything else which can differentiate between, and this is the postal address. So what I'm going to do is actually I'm looking for this word. So what I'm going to do here is I'm looking for physical address, this particular text, and I'll look for the div that contains this. And then I'm taking this address which is just following this div. So let me show you how it looks in code. So search for any element, or we could also call it div, doesn't matter. But where the text is physical address, so this part is going to return this div. And then I'm looking for the following sibling. I've used star, but we can also be specific and use div, doesn't matter. So this is going to give us this div. And finally, we are reading the text. So similarly, exactly the same thing I am doing for postal address and also for phone. So I'm not going to spend much time on how I created this selector. In fact, I'm thinking about creating one separate video where I talk about XPath and CSS selectors in detail. Let me know if you want to look at that kind of video. So what we can do now is we have this dictionary available here. So let's create one empty list. So let's call it results. And what we can do here is we can add these details into this list. So by the end of this loop, this list is going to have all the results available. And this we can print like that. So finally we need to call driver.back so that we go to the back page, to the previous page, and let's run it. So first school, second school. Okay, so we have all the three schools. Now let's do two things. So the first thing that we will do is we are going to hide this browser. So we need to import one more thing, that is Chrome options. So let's create one object. So let's call it options and Chrome options. And in this options, we directly have one property headless. Let's set it to true. And this option we need to pass when we are creating this instance. So now we are going to set options like that. And this time if we run the code, it will be not visible. The browser will not be visible. Okay, so directly we have the results and the browser has been closed in the background. So the last thing, let's save these results in a CSV. So we'll import the CSV module. Okay, so instead of printing, so we don't need the driver. So let's do our work here. So let's open a new file. Let's call it schoolsdata.csv. And this file does not exist. So let's open in write mode. And let's set a new line to blank, otherwise we'll have one extra new line at the end of each line. And let's set the encoding as well to UTF-8. So these are pretty much standard practices that you need to follow. Okay, now what we can do is we can call csv.dictionary-writer. So that's a dict writer, and it expects the file name. Then it needs specific field names. So these are our field names. So the field name should be a list. All right, so we have file, We have field name. So our dictionary writer is ready. Let's call the write header so that headings are written. And finally, we are going to write writer dot write rows. So here we can pass in our results, which we have in this list. So this result, it is a list of dictionaries. So this will directly be saved in this school data.csv. So let's run it. Okay, so it took a long time. Okay, so we have this CSV ready, and remember that we ran it only for 3 schools. So I'm not running it for all the pages. It will take a lot of time, but I hope you get the idea. So let me know if you have some questions or if there is anything which is not clear. So I'll see you in the next video.